The mistake that started it all. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was a place where decisions reshaped the universe, where treaties were forged and wars were ended with a simple stroke of a pen. It was a place of power, diplomacy, and control, until today. Because today, humanity had been given an ultimatum. And that, as history would later record, was a very, very bad idea. The chamber, a vast dome of polished obsidian and shimmering holodisplays, was filled with representatives of 100 different species, each one draped in the elaborate robes, exoskeletal armor, or bioadaptive suits that marked their status. The air hummed with tension, a sharp contrast to the usual quiet murmurs of bureaucratic discussion. At the center of it all, standing alone in a beam of artificial starlight, was High Chancellor Tech of Cafix. His golden exoskeleton shimmered under the grand illumination, and his voice, smooth as polished steel, rang across the chamber. It is with the utmost regret that we acknowledge the growing instability of the human species, Tech declared, his mandibles clicking with a sense of finality. The HFY Dominion has therefore taken it upon itself to correct this path. Effective immediately, humanity will be placed under our supervision. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Some species nodded in grim agreement, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few recoiled, sensing the undercurrent of something far more dangerous than mere diplomacy. But not a single diplomat, scientist, or observer dared to make a sound when Ambassador Olivia Carter of Earth rose to her feet. She was not what the assembled aliens expected. No grand armor, no intimidating war paint, no holographic military insignia flashing across her chest. Just a woman in a sharply pressed suit, her graying hair pinned back in a simple twist, her expression unreadable. She took her time stepping forward, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who owned the room, whether anyone else realized it or not. And then, she laughed. Not the measured, politically acceptable kind of laughter exchanged at these diplomatic gatherings. No, this was a full-bodied, straight from the diaphragm, what the hell am I listening to kind of laugh. It was sudden. It was loud. And it terrified them. Several aquatic species involuntarily released ink into their breathing apparatuses. The bioluminescent scales of a auxiliary diplomat flickered in distress, their entire body unconsciously flashing in colors of panic. Even the mechanized eye observer unit, a being without emotions, hesitated in its calculations. High Chancellor Tech's luminous gaze flickered. His kind did not understand laughter in this context. It was a sound associated with joy, not defiance. Olivia wiped a tear from the corner of her eye, exhaling as her amusement finally settled. "I'm sorry," she said, voice still tinged with amusement. "Did you just say, you're going to supervise us?" Tech's exoskeleton pulsed with shifting shades of authority. Yes, humanity's continued insistence on maintaining military forces demonstrates a troubling level of barbarism. It is an outdated concept, incompatible with the peace we uphold. Olivia's smile thinned. "So let me get this straight. Because we don't meet your standard of civilization, you think you have the right to impose your version of peace on us?" Tech's mandibles clicked. "It is not a punishment. It is for your own good." A new kind of silence fell over the hall. A dangerous silence. The kind that heralded the moment before something truly catastrophic happened. Olivia's fingers curled slightly at her sides. Then she leaned in, just enough that her words carried through the entire chamber, a whisper sharper than any blade. "Oh, honey." The way she said it sent a ripple of unease through the room. Some of the longer-lived species, the ones who had seen firsthand what happened when humanity took a threat seriously, began slowly, subtly shifting toward the exits. They knew. They had seen this before. They had survived it. But the Serapi, in all their brilliance, in all their absolute certainty of superiority, did not take the hint. Tech straightened, his translucent wings flaring. "Your species maintains enough nuclear weapons to render your own planet uninhabitable several times over. You have military bases on every continent. Your very entertainment media glorifies war. Clearly, you require our guidance." Olivia's smile grew wider. And suddenly, every instinct-honed creature in the room understood. This was not a smile of diplomacy. This was not an expression of cooperation. From the far end of the room, Hazelville, Earth's quietest military advisor, had been standing in silence, watching. His uniform was unassuming, his posture relaxed, but his dark eyes carried the weight of something unspoken, something ancient, something sharp. When Olivia glanced his way, he gave the smallest nod. No words needed to be spoken. She turned back to the council, exhaled through her nose, and said, as calm as still water, "Did any of you," she gestured vaguely at the assembled diplomats, "bother to actually study what happens when humans go to war?" For the first time, Tech hesitated. "I don't see how that's relevant." "Because," Olivia interrupted, stepping forward, voice dropping into something soft. Softer, more dangerous. "You've been looking at our military. You've been watching our fleets, our bases, our weapons, and you think that's what we call a fight." She turned, scanning the room, her voice a slow, measured draw of razor-edged amusement. "But that's just what we call peace." Tech's bioluminescent glow dimmed, a shift of uncertainty, the beginnings of understanding. Olivia set her hands behind her back, tilting her head just slightly. "Would you like to see what we call a fight?" The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates turned to each other, whispering frantically. Some demanded clarification, others stared in dawning horror. And amidst it all, Hazelville merely reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his communicator. A single message was sent to the defense network of Earth. Far beyond the chamber, in the cold depths of space, ancient satellites that had never once moved adjusted their positioning. Orbital platforms, officially classified as civilian research stations, began rerouting their energy cores. And deep within an unremarkable asteroid belt, a hidden shipyard, one that no galactic survey had ever recorded, received its first order in over a century. All across the stars, something shifted. The war hadn't started yet, but oh, it was going to be educational. The storm humanity had been waiting for. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was supposed to be a place of reason. It was built on the foundation of diplomacy, created to prevent wars, to stop the mistakes of the past from repeating. And yet, at this very moment, it was failing. Spectacularly. The tension was no longer political. It was primal. The kind that settles deep into the bones, that triggers instincts buried in evolutionary memory, whispering to every species present. "You have made a mistake." High Chancellor Tech of Cafix had spoken with absolute certainty when he declared that humanity would be placed under supervision. He had believed that his words were final. But now, watching Ambassador Olivia Carter, watching the dangerous amusement in her eyes, he realized that he had not started a diplomatic negotiation. He had started a countdown. And worse still, it had already reached zero. The message that changed everything. Across the galaxy, the message sent from Hazelville's communicator was received. It wasn't a message of war. It was a signal. A signal buried deep within the core of every Terran military network, something so old that most modern historians had forgotten its origin. 3 words. Stand by. Confirm. There was no fanfare, no alarms blaring, no dramatic declarations of war. And yet, across human-controlled space, the stars themselves shifted. In the orbital defense stations above Earth, personnel who had never once been given a live order, officers who had spent decades running simulations for a war that never came, sat up in their chairs. On the outer rim colonies, deep space mining outposts shut down all non-essential operations as high-priority network uplinks came online, transmitting encrypted updates to ships that should not have existed. In the depths of the Oort cloud, where Terran black site installations remained undetected by every known surveillance method, cold steel structures came to life. humming with power for the first time in a century. Earth's silent watchers, hidden armadas in the shadows, turned their sights to the stars, and every single one of them awaited a single confirmation. The next word. The moment everything shifted. In the council chamber, Tech's wings fluttered with irritation. He did not appreciate unpredictability, and the human's reaction was not following any pattern he had studied. Ambassador Carter, I do not understand your amusement. His mandibles clicked sharply. Humanity has been given an opportunity to accept its place within the Dominion, to embrace peace. If you resist, you will be subdued. Your forces are nothing compared to the combined might of the HFY Dominion. He stepped forward, exoskeletal armor glinting in the artificial light. Surrender now, and we will ensure your civilization is integrated smoothly. There is no need for violence. Silence. For a long moment, Olivia Carter simply stared at him. Then, finally, she sighed. You know, Chancellor, I think I finally understand. Tech's bioluminescent gaze narrowed. Understand what? Olivia placed her hands behind her back, tilting her head slightly. Why you don't get it? Tech's antennae twitched in irritation. Do not play games, human. If you have a point, make it. Olivia took a slow step forward, lowering her voice just enough that only those truly paying attention would hear it. You think peace is the absence of war. Tech's mandibles clicked shut. He had no response. But peace, Olivia continued, is something you have to fight for. You don't get to impose it on people. You have to earn it. You have to bleed for it. She looked around the room, her voice rising just slightly. The problem with your Dominion is that you've never fought for your peace. She turned back to Tech, and when she spoke again, her voice was no longer soft. You've only ever stolen it from people who were too weak to stop you. The room went still. Tech's exoskeleton dimmed in alarm. Olivia smiled, but it was not kind. You want to teach us peace. Let me show you what peace means to us. Then she lifted her hand and snapped her fingers. Earth's response. Somewhere, far from the council chambers, a hidden command center deep beneath Earth's surface received the final confirmation. The second signal was sent. This one contained only one word: execute. Instantly, across every hidden Terran installation, the change was immediate. Stealth fleets, massive warships built in absolute secrecy, powered up their engines for the first time. Long-range artillery adjusted targeting parameters, marking the precise coordinates of every Dominion fleet within striking range. Encrypted battle networks, links that had been dormant for decades, activated simultaneously, connecting billions of nodes across the entire Sol system. And then, without fanfare, the Dominion lost control of their own ships. The fall of the Peace Fleet. Admiral Xashan of the HFY Dominion had been patiently waiting in orbit, overseeing the Peace Implementation Fleet. Their orders were clear. If the humans refused compliance, immediately subjugate their homeworld. He had expected some resistance. A few ships, maybe an outdated planetary defense grid. Nothing serious. What he had not expected was for every single one of his ships to suddenly go dark. What? Xashan began, but his voice cut off as the bridge's holodisplays flickered violently. Terran cyber warfare teams, already embedded in the Dominion's communication systems, executed their attack in real time. Within seconds, the entire Peace Fleet was blind, deaf, and helpless. Dominion officers screamed in confusion as their navigation controls locked up, their targeting systems scrambled, their engines cut from their own command. And then, the hidden Terran fleets arrived. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't send warnings. They simply opened fire. The entire HFY fleet was obliterated before they could even fire a single shot. The war had not started. It had ended before the first battle could even begin. The moment Tech realized he had lost. Back in the council chamber, High Chancellor Tech's communicator suddenly blared with frantic distress calls. His glowing exoskeleton dimmed in absolute terror as he stared at the holofeed. Ships, thousands of them, human warships, silent, waiting. And then, for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be prey. Ambassador Olivia Carter took a step closer, voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through the fear now suffocating the room. "Now, Chancellor, would you like to discuss the terms of your surrender?" The day the stars fell silent. The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Dominion, a place where the most powerful beings in the known universe dictated the fate of entire civilizations, had been reduced to silence. It was the kind of silence that did not exist in the absence of noise, but the kind that followed the death of certainty. High Chancellor Tech of Kafik stood motionless, his bioluminescent exoskeleton flickering erratically as he processed the impossible. The mighty Serapi Dominion's peace fleet, one of the most advanced military forces in the known galaxy, had been obliterated in seconds. Not in a battle, not in a war, but in an execution. Humanity had never been fighting for survival. They had been waiting. And now, they had made their move. The fall of a superpower. In orbit above Earth, where once a proud fleet of Dominion warships had gathered in preparation to pacify humanity, there was nothing left but debris. Admiral Xashin, commander of the Peace Fleet, had not even lived long enough to understand how he died. His last recorded words, transmitted moments before his ship was reduced to atoms, were, "This isn't possible." He had been wrong. The moment humanity gave the signal, their silent war machine, one that had been carefully built in the shadows, hidden for over a century, activated all at once. The Terran fleets that had never existed on any official records emerged from the void, striking with a precision so ruthless, so calculated, that the Dominion's forces never had a chance. Before Dominion ships could even register the attack, their systems were hijacked, turned against them. Their weapons refused to fire. Their engines shut down mid-flight. Their shields collapsed, leaving them exposed and defenseless. The humans had not just defeated them. They had rendered them obsolete. Tech faces the unthinkable. Back in the council chamber, High Chancellor Tech's claws dug into the console before him, his mind spiraling into pure disbelief. He could hear the frantic, desperate transmissions from his surviving officers. "High Chancellor, we are compromised. We have lost all command over the fleet. They are inside our systems. Our ships are not responding. ***, our forces on the ground are reporting complete blackout. We have lost control of planetary defenses." Then came the last transmission. From a Serapi general on one of their core colonies. His voice was tight, shaking, not with anger, but with a fear the Dominion had never known before. "Sir, they're already here." Tech's breath caught. The war that never began. Across Dominion-controlled space, something far more terrifying than war was happening. Human ships did not engage in full-scale planetary invasions. They did not drop troops. They did not demand surrender. Instead, they took control. With a single signal, every major Dominion warship, planetary defense grid, and military installation was locked down, frozen in place by an unseen force. The Dominion's greatest weaponry, the very thing they had relied on to intimidate the galaxy for centuries, was no longer theirs. It belonged to humanity now. Across hundreds of Dominion worlds, planetary governors watched in horror as their automated defense cannons, once programmed to destroy any external invader, swiveled toward their own cities. Not a single shot was fired, but the message was clear. Olivia Carter delivers the terms. In the council chamber, all eyes turned to Olivia Carter. She had said nothing, had done nothing. And yet, with just a single gesture, humanity had flipped the entire balance of power in the galaxy. She took one slow step forward, adjusting her suit jacket as she regarded High Chancellor Tech with something that could only be described as pity. "You see, Chancellor," she began, her voice level, patient, almost bored. "You believed you were bringing peace to us. that you were civilizing us, that we were some reckless, primitive species that needed to be put in its place. She clasped her hands behind her back, tilting her head slightly. But the problem is, you don't understand what peace actually is. Tech stared at her, unable to speak, unable to comprehend how quickly his entire reality had unraveled. Your kind has never fought for peace, Olivia continued. You've only ever imposed it on those too weak to resist. Her voice dropped lower. And now you've finally met a species strong enough to tell you no. She leaned in slightly. So tell me, Chancellor, how does it feel? Tech gripped the edge of his console, his bioluminescent eyes flashing in pure distress. What? What do you want? His voice was not the voice of a ruler anymore. It was the voice of a man who had just realized he was already dead. Olivia exhaled slowly. Then she turned to Hazelville, the silent military strategist who had, until now, simply been watching with his arms crossed. She gave him the smallest nod. He pulled out his communicator and sent the final transmission. One word. Stand down. And just like that, every human-controlled system powered down. The Dominion's fleets were released from their control, their defenses returned to normal, their weapons restored to their original functionality. And not a single human ship remained in their airspace. It was as if humanity had simply let go. The Dominion's forces, now fully armed, fully operational, should have launched a counterattack, should have retaliated, should have done something. But they didn't, because every soldier, every officer, every commander knew the horrifying truth. It wouldn't matter, because if humanity could take control once, they could do it again. And next time, they might not be so kind. The surrender of the Serapi Dominion. Tech's knees buckled, his wings trembling. There was no war to fight, no battle to win. Humanity had already won, and they had done it without shedding a single drop of blood. The galaxy had only one choice now. Adapt, or fall. Tech, for all his pride, for all his arrogance, understood that much. And so, with a slow, painful realization, he lowered his head. What are your terms?